Thank you all for coming. My name is Rabbi Yonasan Bender, so I'm a clinician here at the place. And just a little, to kind of introduce myself, my background is I originally went to Drake University, and I was majoring in philosophy and world religions. Nice little segue into yeshiva. I came to Israel about 15 years ago, and I became a rabbi. I have a smicha in Yora Yora from the Jerusalem Kollel. And after that, I became a Rav, went to England for a little while, came back here, did some teaching. Still do teaching, actually. I teach at Be'er Miriam, a couple different classes on the science of halacha, science and development of halacha, and the 13 principles of faith. I do it as a hobby because my main gig is I work here as a therapist. I went to Hebrew University, got a degree in social work, and so now I work here. As far as what my interests are working with people, I focus mostly with emotion dysregulation problems, personality disorders, anxiety, depression. I also specialize in marriage here, parenting. This being the lecture, and I also focus on sleep. I practice CBT insomnia. It's an amazing treatment if you guys are interested. It's really wild stuff, things that, just doesn't, it's like the thing you do most, sleep. You really don't put so much thought into like what you're doing and why you're doing, it's kind of a funny way of putting it, why you're sleeping, because you just kind of do it. But just like all the amazing, just how it keeps your life together, just on not just a emotional level, but a physical level. So I really got into that. So that's just kind of, my background, what I'm doing. And like I said, I specialize in parenting. And so this course, what we're going to be doing, is going to be a 6-part course. And, today what we're going to do is we're going to kind of review what we're looking at, kind of orient ourselves, what to expect in the next 6 classes. But specifically what we're really going to be focusing on is 3 parts. There's 3 sections to this. The first is something called parent management training, where it's a very behavioral based sort of way of trying to develop the behaviors you want in your kids and to reduce the ones that you really don't want so much of. We're going to review parenting myths, kind of go over the basic techniques of the ABCs of parenting, about learning what an antecedent is and what a behavior is and what a consequence is. And even tonight we're going to get into that a little bit. But really kind of hit all the different parenting techniques that you've all heard of, praise and how to reinforce behaviors, reinforcement strategies, effective ways of punishing kids. And we'll really get involved in, well, what does that mean? And then troubleshooting with specific issues with large families. Something that isn't so much talked about in the research is, well, how do these techniques apply to larger families? In a more religious context, we don't have the 1.3 kids and a dog, that you have in the States. We'll get into adolescence, teenagehood, and these sort of skills of how to set kids on the right track and help them along in life. Well, they're going to be the same, whether it's toddlers or teenagers, but there's a bunch of slight shifts, I guess you can kind of think of it as, that you'd want to tweak your strategies with kids that are in the teenage years, just because like their bodies and their brains they're working differently, to say the least. We'll touch on how these sort of skills can apply not just inside the home, but outside the home. When you go out to restaurants and going out to visit relatives, and the kids act differently when they leave the house. That's for sure. And also how to maybe even enlist teachers in helping kids get on the right track with what you're hoping to do with them. And we'll kind of wrap up that section with, well, knowing when it's appropriate to maybe go seek professional help and to kind of also protect yourself, to know what to expect and to know the right questions so that you can find the help that you really need, or to know you really don't, and that a lot of parenting problems can be helped simply with using skills that we're going to be covering in today's course and on the other 5 courses, that really are going to be effective in changing things around for you and your kids. The last section is going to be covering something called emotion coaching, and it really is the other bookend, I guess, when looking at what sort of parenting strategies that can help just improve things with your kids. And here it's really not so much focusing on behavioral techniques, but is more really trying to cultivate a sophistication of emotion and awareness of the internal world of the child. So in that section, what we're going to be covering is emotion theory. What do emotions do? What's their function? People really don't think of their feelings as something that does something. Really more people kind of think of emotions as, well, who they are. And I mean, that's kind of, in one respect, that's true. But in another respect, emotions are really just another source of data, another way we engage the world, just like seeing and hearing. That we by understanding emotions in a more sophisticated way, we can actually get something from emotions and help us navigate in our lives, to understand the meaning that our lives are filled with. So we'll be covering emotion theory and moving into validation skills, how to be able to relate to kids and really relate to anybody in such a way where you can reduce anxiety, reduce stress, and kind of help them learn the skills of self-validation so they can do that for themselves, to regulate their own emotions. And that kind of segues into helping kids figure out problem-solving skills. And like I said, this all kind of culminates in allowing a child to regulate their own emotions so they can face the problems of life that are going to hit them, and take that skill into adulthood, just to be a more effective human being, to be able to live according to the values they want to, that they can have access on this world of meaning in a more I don't want to say genuine, but in a more deeper way, I guess, is one way of thinking about it. But today what we're going to be covering is really trying to outline a parenting map, kind of figure out, well, where are you? Where are you at? In the sense of, who you are as a parent, who you are as a couple, who your kid is, and what specifically are your goals for your kid. Without knowing where you are, well, you can't really start creating goals and targets. You have to first kind of get that one down, so you can more actively, kind of like with purpose and intention, figure out, well, which direction do you want to go? What do you want to achieve with your kids? A large part of it sure is instinctual. We all love our kids and we want to do the best for them. But the more clarity that we can develop in what does it mean that we want the best for our kids, well, the more effective we're going to be as parents. The materials we're going to be reviewing are heavily research-based. It's kind of a funny thing to think about, any therapy or any sort of, interventions like this as not having an evidence base, but brass tacks, that actually happens to be the case. I think it's something like, there's over 500 different parenting courses and philosophies that exist out in the market today, and 90% of them just haven't been research-based. So to really give people pause when they're trying to seek out help, when they're trying to get good information, it's like, well, wait, where is this coming from? Has anyone kicked the tires on this one, tested things out? And there's 6 key figures that have been influential in my practice, and I'm going to be drawing heavily from their work. And the first is Dr. Alan Cosden, and he's a child of a mental psychologist and behaviorist. He's one who developed the parenting techniques we're going to be covering in this course. He calls it parent management training. It's kind of a dry sort of title, but basically, like, really trying to leverage how we act with one another to get kids in the right direction. And what's kind of cool about his approach is that it's not just effective for these little hiccups that normal parents have, but is quite effective when it comes to severe behavioral problems, antisocial behavior, autism. It has some traction in more severe diagnoses. But like I said, as far as parenting approaches go, that has the best research out there. So we're drawing from him, and the other researcher I'm heavily drawing from is John Gottman. Very eclectic sort of guy. He started out as a mathematician and statistician actually, and his wife kind of schlepped him into the world of psychology. And what he originally got involved with was child development, and sitting down and really trying to, in a very detailed way, observing child behaviors and figuring out, well, in normal situations outside the lab, what works and what doesn't. How do kids create friendships? How do kids get along in social situations? And that kind of moved him developing emotion coaching, this way of like I said, really trying to help integrate the experience of feelings that kids have, to be able to draw real solid help from our internal experiences. So we're drawing a lot from him, and he also he kind of moved on to marriage. He and his wife developed the Gottman marriage approach, which is again one of the few research-based approaches in marital therapy. So I have a background also in this, and I'm going to be trying to draw from my experience with couples and especially today, try and bring out some important things to kind of keep in mind. That our relationships as people. I mean, man, we are just social creatures. It's an understatement. And our relationships, especially in the home, there's a lot of overlap. You don't just get to be married. You don't just be a parent. But these things are so connected with one another. It's kind of hard sometimes to even figure out, well, where does one end and where does one begin? And definitely the quality of one's relationship definitely feeds into the other as what's happening with the kids. So we're going to be drawing a lot from him. He himself, drew a lot from Dr. Chaim Ganot. In the world of parenting, Chaim, he was a major hitter, in the sense of he and another researcher I'm going to be drawing from of Diane Baumrind of really almost trying to put together two paradoxes of being, of being stern and setting rules and setting boundaries and really not being oppressive about it, but things are the way they ought to be, and there are rules around this place. Where at the same time being extremely open and extremely flexible when it comes to the emotional world of a child. So we're going to be drawing from those two researchers as well to kind of help us orient ourselves of, well, what sort of parents are we? What sort of patterns do we have as parents that might be worth reassessing? And again, like I said, this first class is about reorienting to help orient ourselves as parents. And the last researcher is Aaron Beck. He was the developer of cognitive behavior therapy. And I just kind of thought, it's not going to be drawing so heavily from him, but it was worth kind of mentioning him and as far as the idea of, well, just how both cognitions and behaviors really do interplay with one another, and how thought in many ways is almost kind of the first domino to how we look at a situation, how we feel about a situation, and ultimately how we act. So when it comes to a lot of the behavioral stuff we'll be talking about, it's good to look at his work, especially because the emotion coaching, again, more of a cognitive approach, well, that's kind of the bridge, I guess, between emotion coaching and the behavioral parent management training aspect of things. And finally, well, I'm a rabbi, so I'll be trying to draw from God, whenever I can, and that's no joke. Especially nowadays, it's interesting to see the transition that's going on in the world of psychology, where you had say Albert Ellis. He was also a developer cognitive behavior approaches in therapy, where, not so long ago, he went right along with Freud with this belief that, religion's almost like a parasite. It's something to cast off, and he himself, his thinking was very much influenced by the Enlightenment and reason, and well, the Enlightenment had its pluses, and fair enough, developing science, like we really did cash in with the development of science, but a lot was lost in terms of the ancient wisdoms and the real fundamental truths that exist with a relationship with God, a spiritual relationship. It's a large part of our humanity. So to kind of ignore that, we'll be ignoring a big part of ourselves. So, I'm saying it tongue-in-cheek, but, God will definitely be making an appearance every now and again. And I like kind of finishing that idea. Nowadays, especially with, if you guys are familiar with, it's called, third wave cognitive behavioral therapy, where God is very much, or spirituality is very much front and center of treatment. So even psychology has developed from what Ellis and Freud were pushing to, no, we gotta have that part of ourselves. We can't just cut off. It's like cutting off an arm. We can't. It was worse than cutting off an arm. And we have to integrate a whole person within psychology. So, like I said, so God will be making an appearance, whenever I can manage it. So today specifically, what are we going to be tackling? Like I said, I wanted to offer you guys the opportunity to construct a map, like I said, of where you are, where your child is, before we can even have a conversation about where we want to bring the family, to bring ourselves as parents, and to bring our child as developing adults. They're on the road to leaving home and trying to figure out how to prepare them best for this world. We have to know where we are. We can't just do it. Where do we stand? So before you guys get out of here, I wanted to offer you guys a parenting assessment based on Gottman's work and Bombrun's work, of trying to kind of figure out, well, what sort of parenting style do you have naturally? Then I'm going to give you guys a marriage assessment, again, from Gottman. He developed an amazing assessment to figure out, kind of breaking down all the different sort of factors that make a good marriage. Well, how are things? Because again, like I said, that very much influences how the kids are doing. I'll give you as far as assessing getting a better picture of your kids. I'll give you guys the Eichenbach child behavior checklist. This assessment it's used worldwide and in all major research projects that are assessing child development, and very thorough. It's very thorough. I'm giving you guys a lot. There'll be a lot of questions on these tests, so I did my best to try and find the short forms of all of these. And also, finishing off, I wanted to give you guys the Big Five personality assessment. Again, to kind of get a sense of what sort of lens do you as personality traits, well, what lens do you guys look at your lives? After we kind of sort those issues out, we're going to move on to, well, kind of maybe, I'll offer an idea of goals as being a parent, and ideas of maybe how to develop your own. And we'll review the four basic parenting types, and move on to marriage and kind of look at couple types also, and what sort of things make a good marriage. I'll be diving into a lot of John Gottman's work there. And I ran a research project a while back looking at the Anglo-Haredi community here to kind of, again, give you guys a little bit of a perspective of what's going on, and again, what does the terrain look like. And finally, what I wanted to do is finish off with giving something to you to lead into our next course, something practical, learning how to track behavior in a more sophisticated way. We don't just do things. And by having having a scientific approach to looking at behavior, well, that's really going to enable us to better assess what's going on with our kids and to create the solutions we need to figure out what sort of strategies and techniques would be most appropriate to the context at home. Okay, so like I said, trying to work in God into this course, I wanted to bring the pasuk from Mishlei, Kaf Beis Vav. And the pasuk says like this: Chanoch lenar al pi darko, gam ki yazkin lo yasur mimena. Now we want to machanech our kids. It's a kind of a funny word how to translate that. It's something like inauguration. We again, the kind of same root as Hanukkah. Let's say that's an example of rededicating or dedicating an object to a specific purpose. So we're going to want to do this. We're going to want to do this, with our kids, and it's got to be al pi darko. It's got to be according to their path. And we're going to kind of talk about, well, what does that mean? And we got to do it in such a way that when they get older, it sticks. It's not just setting a kid on a path arbitrarily or through brute force, but it's got to be something that has lasting powers, that's able to translate what we want our kids to get, the values that we have and the beliefs we have and the hopes we have for them, to translate into something that's permanent and stable in their lives. The al pi darko, constructing the map. A lot of people kind of talk about al pi darko as you have to educate the child according to his personality. A part of that's true. Who your kid is on a personal level, well, it can be very different than maybe your personality traits, which is again one reason why to get clarity on what's your personality traits, almost as a comparison to see where there might be overlap with your kid or where there might be a bridge that needs to be built between the two of you. So, well, it's not just about character traits. It's really about trying to figure out what the path is that they're on. And it seems to be there's two parts to this. Got to figure out the destination that we hope for our kids to get to. What are they moving towards? And being on a path, like I said before, you have to know where you are now. So, roughly speaking, it's everything that's in a kid's environment. That's what we're looking at with this idea of al pi darko. Any good psychotherapist will tell you that people come in and then people got problems and life definitely isn't easy. And you can tell the quality of treatment between people who immediately want to just diagnose something's wrong with the individual, as opposed to a more seasoned view of psychotherapy is, well, first assessing the environment. A lot of times, life is difficult. It's not necessarily because someone has a diagnosis or there's something necessarily wrong with their history, but life is tough. A lot of the things that people get hit with, well, it just makes a lot of sense why they're having the problems they are. If you have a couple who they're fighting like cats and dogs, you just can't get them to stop. Well, maybe there's a psychological problem, but chances are what's more likely is there's something wrong in their environment. Maybe one parent, one spouse for whatever reason isn't working, and income's tight. Well, a good environmental change there would try and help both people get part-time or full-time employment. And oftentimes we'll sort things out. The stress of poverty, that's severe. It's not abnormal to be stressed out because you don't have money. Or things, feeling depressed is another really good example. Recently, there have been advances in behavioral approaches to depression, where the therapist is not really addressing, well, how do you feel? The therapist is not really addressing what the internal thoughts are, or the history of the person really is. Really, what these sort of therapies do, and some of the research here really blows CBT out of the water and medication use by a lot. um, is to simply kind of look at the person's environment. How is your day structured? What do you do? And a lot of times people, the way depression starts is, well, something happened, the first domino falls. And it could be something as tragic as, someone in the family dying. I mean, that's tough. Or, losing their job. But it could also equally be likely something positive happened. Something that floored me was, research showing that, there's a fair chance of developing some level of depression when you get a promotion in your work. And you kind of think, well, why would that be? And when you start thinking about it, it kind of makes sense a little bit. True, like you're getting a pay raise, you're getting moved up to the top office, but at the same time, you're losing your social network, people that you've been working with for years. They're staying downstairs. You're moving into a job that you know little or nothing about. Are you going to make it? Are you going to be competent? And people have a negative thought bias where we're a lot more sensitive to danger than we are success. So that also gets factored in to getting this new job. And maybe you might even lose a couple friends, either because you find out that they're bitter at your success, or they're boiling because of their failures. Either way, they can't look at you the same way. So even in something as positive as a promotion, there's a cost to success, I guess, is one way of thinking about it. So what you do is, you just almost kind of reconstruct a person's environment. Get them out of bed, get them to go to the McCullough and get a can of Coke. Because what ultimately happens is, that one domino, that promotion or that tragedy, sets into motion almost like this positive, almost this sort of like positive feedback loop where a person becomes more likely to disconnect from their world. So you want to reconnect them to their environment. So like I'm saying, okay, if those things aren't so successful, then we move on to the big guns, and maybe there's something wrong with the person. But I guess I'm only trying to bring this up because, a lot of times as parents, especially larger families, a lot of the things that we do work for the other kids. The strategies that we have are just fine. You don't need a parenting course for the other three. But for whatever reason, the fourth kid he's having a hard go of it. And it is worthwhile to try and figure out, maybe there is something that you have to change as a parent. And we're going to get into that. But it might also be a simple matter of figuring out what's going on in the kid's environment, what's going on in school, what's going on with the siblings when you're not around. What's going on with friends, in the neighborhood and school. It's worthwhile looking into those things because, like I said, it's not even fair to assume there's something wrong with a person. Life's tough for everybody. It's a common humanity sort of thing. What's also worth focusing on, I already mentioned this, and maybe it's, I'll kind of dive into this a little bit more, is personality traits. Personality traits, when looking at our kids, generally a lot of it's genetically inherited. So don't be surprised that you're educating your younger self. I oftentimes, my eldest daughter, man, it just hits me every now and again of like, wow, you were like really like me. Yeah, it gets a little disturbing sometimes, just like how it's a little version of me in this kid. I got a lot of compassion from my mom, going through those sort of experiences. But more or less, it almost being on the same page personality-wise is a big deal. It does make it more easy for us to relate to our kids that way. But a lot of kids, one or two, again, in bigger families this will come up, is we'll have the black sheep. He does have a different way of looking at the world, a different way of thinking. And so there's been a lot of research, in trying to figure out, what makes up a personality. a couple different labs did a lot of work, and there's been stuff that's been put out there before, but there's one assessment that actually has a strong research backing to it, and it's called the Big Five of Personality Assessment, where basically different labs, different research labs around the world, more or less came to the same conclusions that people have 5 general personality traits that interact with one another, and they're distinct, but they also very much also play into and feed into one another. That is almost kind of like your personality fingerprint. And there's 5 different aspects, 5 different traits that go into this. Openness, and the way I should kind of back up the trait a little bit. The way this assessment kind of works is you kind of imagine like a 100-point scale where there's a line, 50, right in the middle, separates between above 50 means you're going to be more of that trait, and below that 50 mark you'll be less of that trait. So for example, openness is one trait where a person can be very open to ideas, or it's more of a male aspect, as it turns out, like playing with ideas, but maybe more of what seems more predominant with assessments with women is, women are just as open, but they're more open with aesthetics, with more more gregarious, more open to experience of feeling. Not to say they have different feelings. Men and women do have the same feelings, but there's a different sort of I guess a kind of a color to it, a more openness to those experiences. So there's openness and conscientiousness. That's a kind of an interesting personality trait, of this sort of drive of being industrious and orderly. Another trait is being an extrovert. It's almost kind of like the way you can look at being an extrovert as opposed to an introvert is, do you feel charged after going to a party or spending alone time with yourself? I'm right on the cusp there. I'm a little below 50. I'm more of an introvert, so I can tolerate parties, and I've done a lot of work to try and, at the very least, not look like I'm suffering to put off the rest of the rest of the party guests. But I personally get more out of just kind of sitting with myself and a good book or learning, thinking again, very very openness to ideas, thinking thoughts. I'm more energized from doing that sort of thing. There's agreeableness. This character trait is more like it's not a part of it's being polite, but also like the sense of empathy and wanting to kind of put yourself out there, putting other people's needs before yours. And the last would be neurotic. It's a nice term. I think a better way of labeling that one is threat sensitivity. How sensitive are you to threat? And again, there's various levels. It's worth noting, there are variations in gender when it comes to personality, and they're not large. They're small to medium effect differences in all of these, but on the whole, as a general rule, it turns out that men are more disagreeable, and men, like I said before, men like playing with ideas more than openness to aesthetics, whereas women are more agreeable. They're more threat sensitive. And it's actually kind of like getting into the research a little bit, like, well, why that might be. And a lot of people kind of put forward originally that, it's probably social factors. And it's true, the social factors do mediate how these personality traits are expressed. But what ended up happening in the research coming out was the exact opposite of what people thought. Especially now here in Europe, countries like Sweden, Norway, but you see this also in the United States when you compare it to non-Western countries, is that the more freedoms a person has to pursue their interests, even to such extremes as, say, more in the Nordic countries, they make it government policy to try and, make 50-50 nurses, 50-50 lawyers, try and get, parliament should be 50 male 50 female percentage wise. They really put a lot of social engineering into try and evening the playing field, so to speak. What ended up coming out was the more that you enabled both men and women to pursue the things they wanted, well, the wider the gender differences became. It was really cool. So like, it's kind of funny to think about, like, we'll say Iraq, where like it's classically, people kind of think as Iraq or, other Eastern countries as being more male dominant, more masculine. Well, the gender differences are actually much smaller in those countries. So it's worth noting, being more sensitive, say, with your daughters, and being aware that, daughters are going to be more agreeable. They're going to want to be more helpful. And that they are going to be more threat sensitive. So you kind of have to be sensitive to that, especially dads. You dads out there, to be sensitive to that fact that the world they experience, on a fundamental level, may very well not be the one that you are. And there's nothing right or wrong about it. And what I kind of like about the big five is, kind of people look at this list as, agreeable. Well, that must be good. You want that character trait. Or, oh, wow, watch out for neuroticism. That sounds bad. It's really not true. Each has a dark side to them. Because take agreeableness. I'm very agreeable. Pretty high scores for that. And it's something I have to work on because, as funny as it sounds to work on it being agreeable, the trade-off with being agreeable and being helpful, being empathic, but also kind of giving up what you'd rather do, well, that's a great way of breeding resentment. And on the flip side, being threat sensitive, well, maybe it is a good idea to tread more carefully. And somebody who's not so neurotic, well, maybe they're going to get themselves in a lot of trouble because they're not being careful enough. So none of these traits are positive or negative. They really do have their trade-offs. They're kind of getting back to what, the underlying explanation for these traits, especially gender-wise, the differences. It almost kind of seems to be with women. I mean, I hope this isn't, I'm not shattering anybody's conceptions of women, but like, women create life. Like their bodies are designed for it. I mean, the hip structure is designed for it. Women have babies. They feed babies. They make sure babies survive. Everything about the mother is about that. And so there's one way researchers kind of look at gender differences is, well, men are more, personal agents, more, me, myself, and I. But women, they can't be that way. Women are more I with. And that's reflected in being more agreeable because you're taking care of a kid who, man, is a pain in the neck to. I can't believe how my wife gets through that. With getting through the night, feeding the kid, not wanting to use the bottle. It was a really big deal for her, something she really stood on. And well, when you're taking care, you also have to be more threat sensitive because it's not just you on the line. You have a lot more to lose. So it's worth being a little more threat sensitive as a woman. So I guess I'm kind of getting lost in the details here, but it's worthwhile to think about these things because, well, how we see the world in large part is based on our personality traits. It almost kind of filters what we see. And it's worth noting, especially with dealing with our kids who are the opposite gender, to appreciate that fact. So you can kind of, reorient yourself as a parent a little bit, especially if your kids are high in being threat sensitive. Maybe they suffer a little bit from anxiety. Or, maybe your kids are a little too open. And well, you have to, it's their personality and being too rigid to keep them from being curious. Well, you can't put out that fire, but you have to maybe keep a closer eye on kids who are more curious. My oldest son here, is a very curious kid. Very curious. He's always talking, always sharing stories with people, always trying to figure out what other people are about. And that's good. You learn a lot, but you might learn too much. And so it's worth kind of seeing how your kids come out in these sort of assessments. And you can kind of like me, your kids, you can kind of fill it out for them, or if they're old enough, have them take the test themselves. And that could be really helpful in orienting yourself to your kid on that basic level. So with that being said, the destination, where are we trying to get to? And I wanted to run a clip here for you guys. It's kind of it's a selective attention test. I want you all to take a look, and then we'll get back here in a second after the video.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla? This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted. It is available for use in talks, training, and teaching on DVDs from VisCog Productions. Learn more at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Yeah, that was really but 15. Yeah, that's good job. Got more or less the answer right, and a lot of people do miss it's more than just a lot. It turns out that 50% of people miss the gorilla, and it's not 50% of the time, and it's not just a special 50% of people, but it's all of us 50% of the time miss this gorilla. A lot of this is a hardware problem. See, when you kind of look at the the biology of the eyes, we have a lot of different. They're called foci that make up little cells that kind of make in the central part of our vision. We don't have proportionally speaking, we don't have so many of them. A couple thousand, but not so many of them are devoted for high resolution work visually. And so what ends up happening is, biologically speaking, like our eyes have to filter out what we're looking at. If we were actually taking in everything that we were looking at, we'd have to have our brains would have to be 4 times larger. It'd be like these sort of alien heads that you see in these bad B movies. So what ends up happening is, cognitively speaking, our nervous system does take in the information, and we actually see a lot more, so to speak, with our bodies than we actually do consciously. But our brains actually kind of filter out everything else so that we're aware of what we're wanting to look at. So, everybody more or less gets the answer correct. Everyone more or less answers 15 passes. But 50% of the time you miss the gorilla. You literally don't see it. And I just thought this was a great video to kind of bring out that point that we see what our goal is. Not just, part of it, like I talked about earlier, what our personalities are like. We see more of chances to be open or chances to be agreeable or disagreeable, what have you. But more than that, we see what our goal is. And it happens instantaneously. Say for example, all you chairs out here, all you folks out here, if my goal was to leave to go get a coffee, immediately, without thinking, my entire body, my entire nervous system orients itself to looking at you like an obstacle, like I gotta get through you. But, if my goal is to sit here, I don't want to go get a coffee, and here I'm giving this lecture, I'm relating to you differently, and it's not even by choice, necessarily. It's this instantaneous, almost like remapping of what your experience is based on what you want to do. And that happens automatically. You don't get a chance to consciously choose that. And it's worth knowing because you can kind of, the one way out of this sort of problem, this blindness that we all have, is for, really first appreciating it, that we're not seeing everything. And that's exactly why it's so important to get clear what your goals are for being a parent. What exactly do you want to achieve? Because if you don't get that down, and it's this sort of vague, well, I want to be a good parent. Well, I mean, that's noble. I mean, that's something worth wanting. But you literally miss so much. Your entire way of experiencing the world changes based on what your goals are. So it's worthwhile working on specifically what you're trying to do as a parent. So I kind of like looked at this this question of, well, what are you trying to achieve as a parent, from the angle of, well, what makes people unique compared to animals, compared to other creatures in the world, and, well, what makes us unique? Well, maybe that's exactly what we should be focusing on. And you guys, you can kind of tell me what you all think about it. But I kind of came up with four different things that make people unique. One is speech. No other creature speaks. The ability to create meaning from what we say, by what we say. The other is that we're highly social. Different researchers, E.O. Wilson, for example, he's a good example, demonstrates that we're eusocial. And what that basically means is it's not just that we hang out with other people, but who we are on a fundamental level demands that we be in groups, and we work together, and we have different, levels of, not just levels of competency, but different interests, and we work together, and we create whole societies. We build whole societies. And that even on a fundamental level, not just being with people in that sort of building of society sort of way, but we need other people just as much as we need food and air. It was kind of almost by accident. There was a lot of research coming out of Romania in the orphanages there. Romania went through this political upheaval, and I don't know what was going on there, that they got in their heads that they should just kind of like congregate all children into orphanages, take them away from their parents. It was not stuff. But what they ended up discovering is, well, you have all these rows of kids, and they just started dying. They were feeding them, and they're warm, and they got their blanket, and they got their formula. But what was missing is that they weren't being touched. They weren't being held. That we need companionship. We need other people. We need that sort of intimacy and love, the same way that we need food. Otherwise, we just wither away. And you also see this with, say, solitary confinement. It doesn't take a couple days until you start going crazy in that sort of situation. Look, we need people. So, highly social. And we harness nature. That was another part of being human. I mean, like, we got opposable thumb, man. Like, we make tools and we create fire. The other thing I kind of chuckled at, it kind of just occurred to me the other day, and just kind of fit nicely in this idea of, figuring out what your target is that we throw. And you think about it for a second. Different creatures have different skills. Some can swim, some can fly, and they hunt differently. Some run really fast. We throw. That's how we hunt. That's what we hunted for. In the early societies, we throw the spear. Even thinking in as far as language, how we talk. We throw parties. We throw ideas around, and even our kids throw tantrums. The word throw is like very fundamental in how we relate to things. Our eyesight is almost as good as most birds of prey, which is pretty abnormal for creatures that walk pretty slow. Well, why do you need such great eyesight? We look for targets. We take aim and we throw the spear. We shoot the arrow. This is another idea. The idea of being over in a mitzvah, or in a positive or negative commandment. Being over is, well, it's passing. That's what the word means. You're missing the mark. You're passing the mark. It's kind of like an archery term. So even in the way that we look at religious life is based on taking aim and throwing. Every game that people like to play, all the moving games, whether it's you're kicking a ball, throwing a ball, I mean, you're throwing an object. We love projectiles. So it just fits so nicely. Like that's what we do. And in order to hit the mark, in order to achieve our goals, well, what we do is we create a target. We look for what we want to hit. And it's that target, like I was saying before, that ultimately guides all of our actions. So kind of going back and looking at these unique characteristics that make people people, well, that's kind of interesting because, what does speech do? Well, what that basically is, engaging in speech is really engaging in meaning and purpose in life. That we're being, through language, being able to label our experiences, being able to understand ourselves, to understand our feelings, to understand our thoughts, to articulate them more finely. I mean, it's ultimately gaining knowledge, but more importantly, gaining wisdom. And by doing that, we're able to organize our internal life in such a way where we can become more resilient to the hardships and pains that go along with living. Language is important. How we create associations. I mean, I think it's kind of an interesting idea. The Ramban in his commentary on the Chumash gets a little bit into this as well. God created Tov Vohu, this initial substance of reality. Well, after he created that, well, what did he do? It's almost like he spoke to it, and through speaking, through creating and articulating speech, well, that's how God gave meaning and form to the world. Well, we do the same thing. What we call a thing determines what it is to us. That's a power that we have. As far as being social creatures, well, to be a successful social creature means that being emotionally stable enough so that you can form deep bonds with those around you, with friends, with family. And it's not just, that's not just that. That's important enough, but it's like being social, in order to have a job that's worth anything. And I don't mean worth anything valuable-wise, but meaning-wise, being able to figure out what you want to do, will you do things with people at work, and being able to have a stable marriage, to be able to raise one's own kids. It's almost like, being social is taking the power of speech, the power of discovering meaning and value, and being able to translate that into the world and be able to give that to others. It's worth kind of noting also, maybe even almost looking at, well, how we are as social beings, almost having two parts to it. Researchers kind of look at this as being either being in communion with society, or being in cooperation and going along with the flow, being a part of society constructively. And agency, being something different, as being an individual. And there is this paradox, this interplay of knowing when to go with the flow, but also knowing when to take a stand and express your views, express your opinions. And, well, being able to more clearly articulate meaning and being emotionally stable to give to society, well, those two kind of go together to help a person figure out, well, when should you be more communal and when should you be more of an individual? You need to be both, but it's a question of context, when. And the last, as far as harnessing nature, well, that's really just mastering danger. Fire is a tremendously destructive force. But it's by learning how to And again, we'll get into this more with emotion coaching, but learning how to be resilient, learning how to integrate one's emotions and be resilient. Well, that's what enables us to face the dangers of life. And not just face them, but actually turn them into something which is useful. Harnessing fire into electricity, fundamentally. We're so resilient when it comes to fire. We don't give it a second thought when we see it because we've mastered it. And finally, this last idea of, again, being a good marksman is being able to help our kids. And this will be more of the behavioral aspect of things, of teaching them in their bones through practice, learning how to clarify what their values are. What are they living for? What direction do they want to go? But then figuring out specifically, what are the goals that they need to set? How to properly set goals. Not too much, not taking on the world, but learning how to take reasonable goals and to articulate reasonable goals that manifest those values. Those are two very different things. You can almost kind of look at values as a compass pointing north. You never actually get north. It's not a place. The North Pole, but it's not a place. For example, a value of, being a good parent. It's not that anyone's going to give you a certificate one day and say, congratulations, Mrs. Schmidt, you are a good parent. It never happens. But by articulating that value, you'll never arrive at what you do by setting that goal, by setting that target, setting that value. As you go through life, you're able to pick goals that manifest that value of being a good parent. Getting up on time is a goal. It's concrete. You achieve it. You actually bring it into the world. Getting up on time in order that you have enough time to fix your kids their school lunch and get them out of the house so that they make it to school without being late. That you achieve. That's being a good parent. Listening to your kids without interrupting when they're sharing their problems. When the kid just, this is more with teenagers, when Dad, can you just listen? Being a good parent means no matter how painful it is, that you see what the problem is and your kid just doesn't. And you just want to help them, but resisting that urge so they can talk it out themselves, that they can discover the experiences they're having, that they can come to those decisions, they can come to those realizations. Well, that's being a good parent, keeping your mouth quiet and being a good listener. It's a concrete action. So it just seemed to me like, as a suggestion of what sort of targets are you trying to hit as a parent? Those seem to be pretty good ones. But come up with your own, what do you value in your lives? And everyone values different things. It's worth kind of asking, what's special about you and the family you come from? The way that the things that you find meaningful. Well, first know your kid. Well, do they also have a shot of finding those things meaningful? Again, if your kid is not so open, well, being curious might not be a value that's appropriate for them. But assuming that you guys more are on the same page, well, what are those values that make life meaningful for you? And when you set those values, you kind of think, well, what are the goals in achieving those values? And you kind of use that to orient your parenting. But I just thought you should kind of give these as a rough outline of what I mean by setting up values to create goals through. The next, getting back to our pasuk from Mishlei. Chanuch lenar. The Alshich on this pasuk makes the point that there's a window of opportunity here. You have to machanech. You have to give this sort of education to your kid before they're really rooted in any particular path of life. And the research kind of bears this out also. I mean, taking one example. there's a small window up until age 4 or 5 of being able to socialize kids. You kind of look at, especially like 2-year-olds. I mean, like, man, those critters, I think the most violent age is 2-year-olds. And the only reason why we're not terrified of them is because they're little kids. I mean, they're cute. But you just imagine, the sort of temper tantrums that 2-year-olds throw. Can you imagine an adult behaving the same way? Well, that's actually called antisocial disorder. That's actually called borderline personality disorder. And what the research seems to bear out is that you have this window of opportunity to socialize your kids, to kind of curb those sort of anger tendencies, those sort of tantrums. But how you do it? All the classic things of, having a stable home and all that. I mean, that is important. But one thing that has been shown to be incredibly effective is, dad. Dad is super important when it comes to curbing anger. One part of this is roughhousing. Pushing around, wrestling, rough and tumble play. That is super important in as far as socializing kids. And for me and in our home, every Friday night, after the Shabbos meal, all my kids, I got just we had a fourth baby just born here 6 months ago, but all 3 of my kids, my 11-year-old, my 5-year-old, my 2-year-old, we all move the table, have this wide open space, and we're just wrestling. So what do you do when you're wrestling as a parent with these kids? And they love it. Even this is something so fundamental. Every mammal loves wrestling. I mean, like, dogs love wrestling. Mice love wrestling. Every creature really, loves wrestling. And people are no different. Well, what's going on with wrestling? It's worth looking at when you see, like, almost every maybe not reptiles so much, but almost every living creature really loves wrestling. There must be something to it that's helpful. So what it seems to be, and as far as socializing, is teaching kids the difference between being hurt and playing. It's the difference between fun and danger, and it's something worth really thinking about. What makes something fun? It's a little dangerous. That's not so dangerous. But fun has a little bit of danger, a little bit of novelty, a little bit of the unknown. And it's worth teaching kids how to be able to discriminate, to tell the difference between fun and danger, because you don't want your kids going too far when wanting to have a good time. They need to know that there's limits. So when someone gets hurt, sometimes, my kids are just pulling on my ear, like, ow, you got to stop that. That's going too far. So part of the play is, you dads out there, you guys are really demonstrating with your body. You're showing moral conduct. What is it to hurt somebody? So don't do that. Don't pull daddy's ear. That was one part of it. Another part of this sort of roughhousing is it's one way of defragilizing kids. It's a big problem nowadays, especially in the United States. The research that's coming out is, we all love our kids. We all want them to be safe. And that's being a good parent. But what's coming out in the research is there is such a thing as having your kids be too safe. In the seminaries and yeshivas I teach at, I like asking the kids, at what age were they when they were first allowed to go outside without adult supervision? So for my age, when I was a kid, for my generation, it was 6 years old. And that was the national average in the United States. Today it's 16, and it's pushing 17 now. Can you imagine the first time a kid goes out alone, unsupervised by any adult? Well, those kids are sure going to be safe, but maybe they're going to be sterile safe. They don't, in a physical way, their physical immune system is kind of damaged. A good metaphor for this is, say, peanut allergies. I thought this was really nuts. No pun intended. They're legumes, not really nuts. But that it used to be in the States that, when you kind of notice, mom loves her Bamba, she's eating peanut butter, whatever it is, and you start noticing, oh, kids when they're nursing, they're getting a rash around their mouth. Well, okay, you stop having peanuts in your diet, mom. It looks like your kid has a peanut allergy. So it used to be that was the medical advice: stop eating peanuts. Well, what they found was, well, it's kind of odd when you look at Israel. Bamba is a staple. I mean, I can't imagine not giving Bamba to a kid. It's unheard of. It's starting to now more with the American daycare here. It was a couple of years ago. The Gannett said there was a kid who had a peanut allergy, so like no one could bring peanut butter. That was a rough year for my kids. Man, that was rough. But you don't really have that so much, and so here, just for whatever, wow, what's going on here? For whatever reason, Israeli kids have, there's less prevalent of peanut allergies. So what happened was, the research bore out, well, what happens if you stop suggesting to these mothers, what if you stop telling them, oh, we don't have peanuts? Well, let's see what happens. Well, it turned out that, if you take the pool of all people who would be susceptible to peanut allergies, well, if you tell mom to come off the peanuts, 20% of those people are going to go on to developing a life-threatening allergy. You're condemning these poor kids, these poor people, to carry around an EpiPen for the rest of their lives. Like that. How many thousands of dollars does it cost for one of those? Just one of those. But if you don't, and if you have mom continue to eat peanuts, what happens? Only 1% end up developing a peanut allergy. And the metaphor holds true here, that it's worth putting some thought in how you can defragilize your kids. So when you're doing rough and tumble play, it kind of hurts. Sometimes people get hurt. Sometimes people get a bloody nose. Sometimes, on accident, they hit their face on the floor. Sometimes they get scratched. And by kind of being willing to feel a little pain, well, it doesn't just toughen you up, but it's more than that. It's that you kind of get a feel in your body. Well, sometimes you do get hurt, and that's no reason to stop playing. More than that, on a moral level, that's no reason to take revenge. You get hurt playing, you don't hit the other kid back. You keep playing. It was an accident. So it defragilizes kids. It also, rough play, especially when you have a lot of kids, you develop teamwork. I mentioned, 3 of my kids here every Friday, we're all wrestling around. So my oldest one, she's the brave one. She kind of organizes everybody and strategizes with my son and my 2-year-old daughter. And, then they attack. And, my son, he's just wild like you wouldn't believe. So he's literally jumping in the air on top of me. And my daughter's, grabbing me on the leg, and she's trying to, really figure out what's the right angle to come at me with. And then my daughter, once my son's distracted me jumping on me, and my daughter's got me in a nice arm lock. Well, here comes my 2-year-old daughter, and she's just sits on my head, last week she even, there was a book on the couch. She just reaches over, she's sitting on my head, and she's looking at a book. But they're all working together. You only get the idea behind this is you only get so far instructing kids verbally how to work as a team. But it's something that your whole being has to learn how to do. You need to have it in your body that you just know how to work with others. And you can kind of, get a sense of this with, I have a pretty good radar for this, seeing people on the street, people who just don't look comfortable in their bodies. And I strike up conversations with them, and I'm a weird, therapist, I love research. And so I'll kind of ask them, did you ever, wrestle around with your dad when you were younger? And the people that are the most awkward tell me no. And the people who seem really solid in their bodies, that they know where they're going, they tell me, sure enough, they were. That was an important part of growing up. So rough and tumble play, rough housing, super important. Another aspect of socializing, again with dad, The research comes out that dads are, whether or not dads realize it, super important when it comes to showing kids how to manage negative emotions. The research that Gottman's done has shown that when it comes to being able to process, to actually label and process anger and sadness, real negative emotions, it's really dad that has the strongest influence on being able to be a good model of how to deal with negative emotions. And there's some one way of kind of looking at this is, like I said before, with personality types. Well, mom is usually more agreeable. Mom's usually more giving. Mom's usually more empathic. Mom is putting herself out there, trying not to show her kids the negative emotions she's definitely having. Well, dad's not like that at all. Men are disagreeable. That's why 90% of people in prisons are male. That just happens to be a strong personality trait. And it's that disagreeableness that dads demonstrate to their kids of, well, this is how you are. This is the best way to be disagreeable. You don't just lose your temper. You don't just break down. You have to be able to learn how to hold negative feelings in a way where you're able to manage yourself. And that really comes from dad. Just kind of broadening this idea out a little further in terms of socialization is how our kids see us as parents. We're models of behavior. You kind of like think of it as like every day they're exposed to mom and dad, and exposed every day, mom and dad, mom and dad, mom and dad. And you hope mom and dad are normal. If at least one of you should be normal. And what you're doing is, well, you're showing what normal is to kids. So that when they go out in the world, and when they meet people, when they're figuring out who to marry, whatever normal is in the house is exactly what they're going to feel as normal. So, again, we're going to get into this a little more later this evening, but really sorting out your marriage, treating your spouse with respect and consideration. You're showing your kids what to look for when they get married. So that's as far as socialization goes. And like I said, there's a window. Age 4 or 5. The as far as being able to overcome, being less likely to have serious diagnosis. Okay, that it is a window, and again, well, not everything's a serious diagnosis. Like every bit helps. But you should also know, you're going to always be a model to your kids. But somewhere around teenagehood, when the more the kids are leaving the house and leaving that safe space you're providing for them, the world around them, their friends, become their models. So again, it's really worth thinking about this. What you present to your kids as normal is also going to determine the sort of friends they choose. So their friends will be little versions of you, because that's what the kid knows as being good and normal, and that's the way it should be. So again, socialization, that's an important part here, and there's a time. It's kind of summing all this up here. The last part of the pasuk of Gam ki yazkin lo yasur mimena, that when they become in their old age, they'll never depart from this path. Well, the Malbim says the basic strategy here is what you're doing in order to make sure that what you're teaching them lasts is you're ingraining habits, specifically habits within them, and that they do have to fit your kid's personality. So what I'm offering, especially what we're going to be covering in this course, is parent management training, and the motion coaching are going to be really doing exactly that. That, again, parent management training, that's going to be more the behavioral aspect of things, the behavioral sciences and learning theory, to develop those specific habits, the habits that will predict a better life when they become adults. And emotion coaching, again, focusing on the more emotional, more cognitive aspect of learning how to integrate their internal world, how to regulate their emotions, to be resilient in the face of tough feelings, to develop that level of autonomy and creativity so that they'll be able to, on their own, solve the problems in life that are causing all the tough emotions to begin with. Now, like I mentioned a little bit before, as far as the research here, the evidence is solid in these two approaches. I wanted to touch a little bit on the treatment outcomes. There's a lot is writing on this. That whether it be parent management training as well as emotion coaching, and definitely putting them together, what you're doing is you're decreasing and you're protecting your children from developing anxiety disorder, depression. They'll be less likely to have behavioral disorders, again, antisocial behavior, problems with aggression. And these skills are also helpful for kids who are on the spectrum of autism. What just as important, maybe even more important, is not just what you're protecting your kids from, but what you're increasing, what you're giving them. That these skills end up, the research shows that you're able to make your children, help them be more assertive, less aggressive, but more assertive, to know what they want and be able to clearly articulate it. That it increases academic success, increases the job success as well, increases income. Literally, they'll make more money in life, and that doesn't hurt. Increases the likelihood of stability in marriage. Again, emotional regulation is increased. The likelihood that they're going to be involved in the community, just being involved in community projects. And definitely strengthening the child-parent bond. And the number as well as quality of their friends. Enabling them to be more empathic and more compassionate. All these things correlate with using parent management training and using emotion coaching. We're kind of running short on time here, but I guess where I wanted to kind of end things off here was, where do things go wrong? Now, there's external reasons and internal reasons. Like I mentioned before, being good, a part of this is almost like, enabling parents to be their own therapist, so to speak, with the skills we're going to be learning here. But it's worth addressing the externals first. Where do things go wrong? So I have a list here of different avenues to explore. And you kind of look at, and here it'd be very helpful of using the Eichenbach. I'm going to be sending you guys, by email, to send you the Eichenbach child behavior checklist. And what it does, it assesses for both these sort of external problems, but the external manifestations of these problems, and internal manifestations of problems in kids. But what we're kind of looking at is, well, what is harmful? Invalidating environments. Oh, just get over it. Give me a break. These sort of like giving the message. What you're experiencing and what you're feeling is unimportant. Invalidating environments. And this one is even kind of tricky because, there is variation in how intense people feel emotions. Sometimes you have kids born into families that, you have very, very low, families that are more, mom and dad are less sensitive to emotion, let's say, but the kids are very sensitive. And so it's not so much that mom and dad are trying to invalidate their kids, but it's a serious challenge to not fall into that, because the kids just literally feel more deeply. So invalidating environments. Not paying enough attention to parental self-care. Parents exercising, getting enough sleep, investing in their relationship, just to make sure that, just like not having making sure you're eating well so you don't have, weird, blood sugar problems, like something as simple as that. Those make a difference. Taking care of yourself, investing in yourself. As I kind of mentioned before, conflict within the marriage. Being too strict with punishments. We're going to get into that, how to more effectively discipline kids, but that's a serious problem. Economic deprivation. That I thought this was kind of interesting. It's not just being poor that increases the chances of kids suffering, but it's got to be that within their social group. So I mentioned we're not going to get to it tonight, but the research I did on the Anglo-Haredi population here. Well, one thing that came out of that research, and other researchers have noticed this also, is just because you aren't making so much money, that's not what is so harmful. It's you're not making a lot of money compared to everyone in your neighborhood or your society. So if everyone more or less is making the same low income, well, okay, man, yeah, it's hard not having money, but you're not going to suffer emotionally over it. That's the point I'm making. So, that economic deprivation. And the counterproductive parenting strategies, I kind of feel bad about it. We didn't get so much into it tonight, but we're going to list off these other parenting strategies that just don't work. Just being coercive, and also being very rigid, ignoring context. If your daughter's screaming and you're very rigid, no screaming in the house. Well, maybe she has a good reason to scream. Maybe there's a problem that you need to address and now. So you can't just give blanket rules ignoring context. So those are things that can go wrong, as external reasons. Where things can go wrong as far as internal reasons go is, well, there are the genetics do play a fair role in the problems people have. It seems like if you kind of like collect all the different factors that influence a person's general mental health, let's say, well, 58% of who you are, the variance. 58% of that is, well, what are your genes? That's not the whole picture, and this isn't determinism at all. But taking seriously, like, we do have personality types. We do have proclivities to take seriously, and so we have to keep those in mind as parents. Self-regulatory factors. Being able to manage emotions. Again, if people have stronger emotions, it is worth investing more time in helping your kid develop these sort of emotional coping skills to regulate their emotions. And behavioral skill deficits, just simply not knowing what the right thing to do is. And this one I thought was kind of interesting, this gene-environment interplay. There's a sort of mismatch. Again, the personalities in the family don't exactly match. Or here, for example, the negative parenting, or I don't mean in the objective sense, but again, like some kids are more sensitive. Doesn't really go. That's one factor, that's sort of negative parenting, but from the parent side, but looking from the kid side, more colicky kids, they're harder to parent. They are more of a stress on parents. Again, this kind of gets back to parents do have to take care of themselves, because maybe you don't have such easy kids sometimes. Take ADHD. The research shows that does take a toll on a parent's ability to regulate his emotions, and so that mismatch is something to address. And I wanted to touch a little bit on ADHD a little bit, because it's so prevalent in parenting. I've seen a lot of very solid research where, and the numbers are shocking, it's almost like 50% of people diagnosed with ADHD, kids diagnosed with ADHD, really are suffering from a sleeping disorder. They're not getting enough sleep. It happens to be they have the same symptoms. That's something worth seriously taking into account, especially when you look at how, say, Adderall, Ritalin, these sort of medications actually harm sleep. So if chances are, flip a coin, your kid might actually have a sleeping disorder, and putting him on ADHD medication only makes it worse. in terms of the gains they would see from sleep. And sleep is important. Sleep's important. I mean, physically speaking, just shocking to me, just reduces the chance of having a heart attack, 400 times less likely, or, around the same number, these large numbers less likely of developing cancer. And, sleep is important. And when you don't get enough of it, the symptoms of not getting enough sleep mirrors those for ADHD. And what we're going to be getting to with parent management training is, well, it might actually be that, well, we have to have a different way of looking at behaviors. It's not just that kids do things, but behaviors achieve goals. And they have a function to them. And kids often, they're not going to be consciously aware of what they're doing. Kids aren't manipulative. They're not cognitively developed enough to be manipulative. I mean, to be manipulative, you have to be able to predict multiple, possible behaviors that your actions will influence, and you pick, well, if I do this, I'll get my desired behavior out of dad. Well, no, kids aren't manipulative that way. They're not that sophisticated. But kids do fall into behaviors where unconsciously, well, it just seems to be whenever I scream, I get my pacifier. The kid's not being manipulative. So you have to kind of watch, well, what's the function of this behavior? What does it get our kid? Can we replace how we relate to our kid, or try and help a kid behave differently to get the things they're naturally striving for? So, like I said, this is a nice rundown of different avenues to explore when looking at, well, where have things gone wrong, and where might it be a good idea to look into turning things around. This is a nice little checklist. And like I said, the Eichenbach assessment is also really helpful to get more clarity on your particular circumstances. So anyway, it's kind of wrapping things up. I want to thank everybody for coming, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week.